And welcome to day 2. Did you have a good time at game night last night? Awesome. Well, thank you for being here so bright and early this morning. I'd like to start off today with a question. What brought you to Chef? Let's hear some answers shouted out. Working with Nell. Well, thank you. That's a good way to start the talk off. What else? What else? Awesome community. I had a feeling that for many of us here in this audience, the answer would be the same on mine. It was our community that brought me to Chef. It is our community that keeps me at Chef. Now, when I started at Chef 4 years ago, it was the first time in my career that I was paid to write open source software full time. And I remember tweeting this. At the time, I tweeted this. One of the reasons I'm excited and a little nervous about working on open source full time for Chef is the entire world, or at least the Chef world, will notice if I get it wrong. Noah Kanchowitz, a prominent Chef community member, tweeted back at me, "Not if, but when. You get used to your failures being public, fix them, and move on. There is work to be done." Now, this not only brought me some comfort, knowing that I'm not alone, but also some inspiration. I realized, yeah, if I get something wrong, the entire world might see it, but that also means the entire world is there to help. Open source development does involve being vulnerable, but it's a shared vulnerability. We are all in this together, creating software in the public eye and learning as we go. But with that vulnerability, there is a phenomenal feeling of connection, of learning and building together as a community. This is what I consider the absolute best part of open source and the absolute best part of Chef. Now, along with being the best part, it's also the most important part, because Chef the product, Chef the business, Chef the everything else that is would not exist without our open source community. Our community built the foundation upon which every part of Chef stands. When our community is successful, we are successful. When our community thrives, we thrive. Now, Chef makes amazing technology, but that's not what makes our community so good. It's the way the humans who create and use that technology interact with each other that makes our community magical. Now, the first place I witnessed this magical community was on Supermarket. Who here has used Supermarket, either the public one or a private one? All right. Who here has shared something on Supermarket? Excellent. Well then, as you all know, Supermarket is where the Chef community shares Chef cookbooks, inspect profiles, and much more. It's where I started my career and my journey with Chef, and where I experienced working with our community firsthand. Now, something that struck me, we not only share our successes on Supermarket, we learn from each other's successes and build on them. Supermarket is at the forefront of human innovation with technology. And we don't keep those innovations to ourselves. We share them with each other and with the world. For me, Supermarket is a fulfillment of the open source dream, a place to see someone take the work that I contributed and modify it, add to it, use it in ways I never would have imagined. Now, one of the best examples of human innovation on Supermarket is the Sous Chefs organization. Thank you. Do we have any members of the Sous Chefs here today? We've definitely got some of them. Well then, as you know, the Sous Chefs are a community of Chef cookbook maintainers working together to maintain important cookbooks. Now, one of the most incredible things you, our Sous Chefs, do is you adopt those well-used and well-loved cookbooks on Supermarket when the original authors are no longer able to maintain them. You keep those cookbooks active and updated for all to use. Everyone, if you've used a Chef community cookbook, you have likely used the works of the Sous Chef. Let's give them a big round of applause. Now, after working on Supermarket for a couple of years, I transitioned to the Habitat Core team, where I saw this phenomenon of human-driven technical innovation again through the Habitat Core plans. Who here has used a Habitat Core plan? All right. Who here has contributed to a Habitat Core plan? Excellent. Glad to have you in the building. Well, as you know, core plans are the literal building blocks for every implementation of Habitat. And not only that, the entire Chef ecosystem depends on Habitat core plans. Seeing and experiencing what our users do with them, the things they assemble, the things they create, the ways they add to the core plans, it never gets old. Now, there are over 600 Habitat core plans. Keeping all of these plans updated and building is a massive undertaking, especially when you consider a subset of these plans that we call the base plans. These are for the lowest level building blocks of software, things like GCC, glibc, OpenSSL, and much more. Every single Habitat plan depends on these base plans. And when one of these base plans is updated and rebuilt, every plan that depends on it must also be updated and rebuilt. Then every plan that depends on those plans must also be updated and rebuilt. This is what we call the rebuild the world scenario. Now, these scenarios are enormous and extremely difficult tasks. And today, I'd like to highlight two community members who have contributed extensively to these rebuild the world scenarios. And that's Romain Sertalon and Graham Weldon. Let's give them a big hand. Romain and Graham, you have been instrumental to our base plan refreshes, volunteering your own time and making it possible for us to do these massive rebuilds. Now, something that has always amazed me about the Chef community is that every single one of us knows when one of us succeeds with a Chef community cookbook or an inspect profile or a Habitat plan, we all succeed. We build on each other's successes. We build with each other's successes. We celebrate each other's successes, knowing that when one member of the community thrives, that means we all thrive. Now, I sometimes take a moment and I think back to my previous tech jobs. I remember how every night and every weekend, I would have this cloud of doom and gloom hovering over my head, dreading what I was going to find at work on Monday morning. Who else here has experienced that? A lot of us have. Chef is the first organization I've worked for where I don't have this cloud of doom and gloom hovering over my head, because I know no matter what I might find at work in the morning, I will not be facing it alone. I not only have the entire company behind me, I have the entire Chef open source community at my back. This is the power of community. We can walk knowing that we are never alone. Now, we are at ChefConf talking about the Chef community, but community isn't just vital for Chef. Community is absolutely mandatory to every business and every industry. The technical problems we face as organizations, industries, governments, even as humanity itself, are impossible to solve alone. The stakes are just too high not to code together, to collaborate and build on each other's work. We need more software to solve the problems we face. We need better quality software to solve the problems we face. And open source communities produce better software. Thank you. When we develop software as a community, we expand our range of experiences. Bigger and smaller companies, bigger and smaller teams, different industries, different cultures, different values, and different needs. We bring in perspectives we never would have considered otherwise. Now, the first place I experienced this was when I was working on Supermarket, and I found out I needed to make some changes to it so it would work in an air-gapped environment. Now, this need had never even occurred to me before, but as I learned, it is mission critical to many organizations to be able to operate our software in environments without internet access. Now, this input came directly from a community member. Without it, we would have missed out on a massive user base that needs Supermarket, that needs a place to share cookbooks and tools, needs that place to build on each other's successes, especially in these air-gapped environments. And as a result, whenever I write code now, I do everything I can to make sure it can be used in all environments, with or without internet, so it serves as much of the community as possible. Our community were the ones who showed me how important this is. Now, we also learned this firsthand when we released Habitat. community members immediately requested the ability to run it on Windows. Now, this had been in the plan to eventually add support for Windows, but our community showed us that many people want this support sooner rather than later. So we added it in, and now many of our biggest Habitat customers run their Habitat deployments at least partially on Windows. So this was a case of the community guiding us on where we needed to take our product next, on what would be the most useful to the most people at that particular time. This shows how we at Chef, we don't develop software just for our community, we develop it with our community. And perspectives from the community are written into every layer of our products. This is the foundation of our success. Because more eyes on the code, more perspectives, and more contributions make better software. Better software and better community means we have a bigger impact across the world. And as Corey said yesterday, the best way to build software is to do it in close collaboration with the people who use it. Now, we at Chef know the right way to build software. However, building a business on top of creating open source software is a whole nother challenge, one that's become especially relevant over these past couple of years. Now, this has led some people to ask, is open source a sustainable business model? Now, my response to this question is open source is not itself a business model. It's a way of creating and maintaining software. However, the way we apply open source software to our businesses certainly is a type of model, and that model is still in the experimental stages for most of us. Now, at Chef, we used to use an open core business model. This meant the code bases for these core products, Chef Infra, Chef Inspec, and Habitat, these were all open source under the Apache 2.0 license. Now, when we created builds from these code bases, we also distributed those builds under the same license. Certain additions to the core product, like Chef Automate, were closed source. And if you wanted to use a build of Automate, you had to have a commercial relationship with Chef. Now, the idea behind this model was that as people found value in the open core products, they would then want to pay for the premium add-ons to those products. Now, the problem we found, for us at least, is this model incentivized us as a business to keep more of our code closed because closed source products were where we made our money. Additionally, when it came time to decide where to put headcount and other resources, again, as a business, we were highly incentivized to put them on the closed source products rather than the open source ones. So for us at Chef, this model introduced complexities that held us back from creating the business and the community that we knew we wanted to. Something had to change. And this led us to make our bold leap into our new model, where all of our major product code is open source under Apache 2.0. Thank you. It's a good thing. Rather than trying to close more of our code, we went the opposite direction and we made our code more open. Now, this was one big change. The other big change was around the builds that Chef created from these open source code bases. These builds, or you can call them the compiled binaries, whatever you create from that code base and run on a system, these builds created by Chef are warrantied and indemnified, and these builds are now distributed under a new commercial license. Now, we knew going in this would be a big and very controversial change. And we would not have even considered it without a very good reason. The reason we did this is now all of our major products generate the same value while all being open source. This means that tension around whether to spend resources on closed source products versus open source products is gone. I heard some cheers for that. I think that's a very good thing. We are now incentivized to spend resources on all of our products, which benefits everyone who uses them. Now, along with changes to how we code and distribute builds of that code, this new model also involves some changes to how we operate as a community. Now, we used to have 3 separate communities at Chef. One for Chef, one for Inspec, and one for Habitat. And these were each set up with their own system of governance. Now, this was intentional. We felt having separate communities would make it less likely that they would be competing with each other. Now, this did work well for a time, But then we had to figure out what to do when we added automate to our open source profile, and what we would do when we added more Chef products in the future to that open source profile. Having 3 systems of governance was straining enough. Adding in a 4th one would have been too much. We knew we desperately needed a consistent and efficient system of governance for all of Chef's open source products. As I found out when we started this journey, Chef has over 1,000 open source projects, if you include each core plan as a separate project, which I do. And we desperately needed a simplified way to manage them, a way with less overhead for all involved. This led us to create the Chef Book of Open Source, now available for anyone to view on GitHub. This book defines how we do open source here at Chef and how we function as an open source community. It is, as Corey put it, effectively a collaboration on how to collaborate in open source. Now, the big reason we put this on GitHub is it's a living document. We are iterating on it as we go along. If you would like to work with us, if you would like to walk with us on this open source journey, please reach out. Open an issue, open a pull request, come up and talk to us in the hallway, talk to us at the community celebration tonight. We would love to have you involved. Additionally, for people who are involved in other open source communities, we would welcome and love if you would try out some of the practices in this book and let us know what works for you and what doesn't. Now, implementing and executing this new wave development across Chef was a massive amount of work. But we see it as an extremely worthy investment because, again, open source communities create better software, which means more open source software is better for both Chef the business and all of our customers. Additionally, more open source software is also better for our community. It allows more interaction between Chef's internal engineers and external contributors. It allows us to learn from each other and build on each other's knowledge and experience. And it's not just the Chef community that benefits. The effects of healthy open source communities are felt far and wide. Now, one of my greatest joys throughout my years at Chef has been taking the lessons I learned in our community and bringing them to the Operation Code community. Is anyone here from Operation Code today? Yeah, I know there's at least a few of you. Operation Code is a nonprofit which teaches software engineering skills to military veterans, to the military community, including those active duty service members, those veterans, and their families. Thank you. They deserve a giant round of applause. And one of the ways we teach members of our program is through running real open source projects. One of the best things we can give someone in our program is that real-world, demonstrable coding experience on their GitHub profile that they can take to potential employers. Now, I've taken the lessons I learned from Chef's communities, lessons on open source governance, and applied them to Operation Code. And what this means is members of our program, they not only learn how to code, they learn how to contribute to, maintain, and govern open source projects. They learn how to mentor new contributors and improve our projects for all involved and all to come. It's a virtuous cycle that keeps on giving. Now, additionally, just as I've applied lessons learned from Chef to Operation Code, I've also brought lessons from Operation Code back to Chef. In particular, this one. The idea that we as a community hold ourselves to a higher standard. A higher standard in the work we do. A higher standard in how we interact with each other. A higher standard in how we build technology together as humans. Working together in the open online can be very hard. I think all of us have experienced that at one point or another. But the opportunity we have as a community, the ability that together all of us can do, is we can raise the bar for our community and for all open source communities across the world. Again, with our community, we are never alone. This is a journey that we all walk together. Here is my challenge for every single one of you in this audience and every single one of you watching at home. Hold yourself to a higher standard in every bit of code you commit, in every message you write, in every interaction you have. Let's lead the open source world together in a positive direction. Thank you. The world needs us to do this because, again, the problems we face as a society, as humanity, are impossible to solve alone. But as we solve them together, we improve organizations, we improve businesses, we improve industries, we improve governments, we ultimately improve human lives. Are you ready to build and grow together as an open source community? Let me hear you. Are you ready to hold yourselves and each other to this higher standard? So say we all. Get on your feet. So say we all. So say we all. That was a dream come true right there. Thank you, everyone. I am so proud to be a part of this vibrant, exciting, and committed community. Thank you all for being a part of it, too. Thank you. Now, our next speaker is a familiar face to the chef community. He's one of the founders of InSpec and DevSec.io. He's now a product leader for cloud and AI at Google. Please welcome Dominik Richter. Hey, Dominik.
That was awesome. All right. In April of 1913, in the Mississippi countryside, an artist was born named McKinley Morganfield. He is now known professionally as Muddy Waters, the father of modern-day Chicago blues. Muddy Waters' influence spread through the British music scene, catching the ears in 1968 of Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, John Bonham, and Jimmy Page. These young men formed the band, a really freaking good one. You've probably heard of them, Led Zeppelin. The most, yes, debatable, influential rock band in history. So Led Zeppelin's legacy continued to influence and fuel the great Seattle bands, such as Nirvana and Soundgarden, or the 21st century artists like Kesha and Lady Gaga. Where am I going with this? This is still a talk about AI in operations, isn't it? Yeah, think about it this way. So just as Led Zeppelin laid the foundation, was built on a foundation that Muddy Waters came before it, AI is built and evolves on the foundation that you all lay with building the coded enterprise. So in the next 20 minutes, we'll dive into that evolution. We'll dive into artificial intelligence. We're going to look at what's real, what's coming, and how it relates to us as humans and our work that we do today. So what do we know about AI? Well, it's out there. It's in a bunch of fields. This is, for instance, recently in the field of medicine. It can help you detect cancers, tumors. This is in the field of finance, where it, for instance, helps conduct trades. Actually, most of the trades are done by robots these days. Even in some of the creative fields, like music, we have seen AI, which was honestly weird to me in the beginning. And then, of course, there's this. This, by the way, is my latest attempt at trying to crash the internet. Didn't work. But AI is kind of important to Google, like considering they went from mobile first to AI first. And AI has been introduced in many different fields. So for instance, we've got this awesome new augmented reality and maps. We have new capabilities in the assistant. If you haven't seen, shameless plug, the Google I/O Keynote, I highly encourage you to do so. It's really exciting to see some of these things. So okay, AI is out there. In terms of the hype curve, where are we at roughly? Yeah, right at the peak. Gartner puts us there with deep learning and everything else. But honestly, when we think about it, the way that we talk about it, I would put it way up there, actually. And this is fueled by the lofty goals that we have from television and movies, anything from droids like C-3PO and sentient cowboys from Westworld. And the reality is a little bit more sobering. It's more specialized. It's still magical, right? Like when AI helps you find a tumor, or it's magical when StarCraft players get beaten by AI. That's a different story. So, okay, everybody is getting fancy new AI tools. What about us? What about us who are in development and operations? Where are our fancy tools? And does it get me out of the office faster at night? That's a good goal. Well, before I get there, I have to cover something else first, because anytime I bring up AI, there's like this lingering fear with people. This lingering fear that these cutesy little robots are going to take my job away. Like, don't look at me with those puppy dog eyes and your rounded edges and everything. Disney, well, Anna, thank you for the movie. I can see your vicious intentions. I can see right through you. And, it's kind of true. The idea of machines replacing jobs has been one that's been around for a while. We've seen it in the last century or two with the introduction of motorized vehicles, the steam engine, the automobile, called the death engine on wheels initially. I still remember, and this may sound weird, but my grandpa plowing some of the smaller fields that he had with a horse and a plow. That isn't too far away, and when we introduced new technology there, it was met with fear as well. But you can go further back. Like, who knows what this is? It's a watermill, right? How do you think the ancient Grecan people reacted to the introduction of the watermill? Was it great, heralded, awesome, there's a watermill? No, it was met with fear. It was met as an introduction of a technology that was going to replace labor, and it did. It caused starvation in a few parts too. So technological unemployment is something that's been around for a while. It's been with us as long as human culture has evolved. And some say that right now we're in the middle of the third industrial revolution, and that up to 47% of the jobs in the US right now are at high risk of being automated away. So yeah, there is a dark side to this. But also, as new technology comes in, when it is first introduced, before it starts creating jobs, it destroys old jobs, and that is true. We could try to stop it, we could try to fight it, but ultimately it will only slow it down and will make the transition more painful. So what I always like to think about is we should find ways of shaping it and making it do the right things for us and helping it evolve with the right opportunities. So ultimately, AI provides new tools. It's a new set of tools that you can use, a new set of working, it helps you with collaborating as well. It gives you new jobs. When I think back, for us in technology, that's pretty normal. When I was a pipsqueak, I started with C++. Now I'm coding in Go. We went in the blink of an eye from physical servers to virtual machines to containers, the cloud, serverless, a whole range of technologies that happen rather quickly. And AI is basically another tool that's been added here today. Even though some of the mechanisms that we have right now are still in the beginning stages, it is continuously evolving. So we know that AI doesn't happen overnight. You don't just suddenly wake up one morning and there's self-driving cars everywhere to get you to work. The same is true for us in operations. It won't just move us from dreaded debugging all night because I put a comma somewhere where I should have put a dot, to daiquiris on the beach somewhere. It's not going to happen. But it does provide tools to help us. So how do we get there? What needs to happen? I like to think about it in the terms of 3 steps. The first step is we need to collect and structure the data. And you've seen this with every company that's really based on AI these days. That's what they have done. They have collected large amounts of data because they knew that it was going to be the foundation upon which they can learn and become better. And it's also something that I feel we got really, really right these many years ago when we first created InSpec, but also with Chef and other tools, that it started to structure that information. It helped us collect it, structure it, expose it. And that's the foundation. In the second step, we look at all that data, and we are starting to learn from it. We want to understand what's really going on. And it's about gaining insights. So for instance, if you're in a data center and there's a rack on fire and it's dripping battery acid everywhere, there is an insight that says you should probably do something about that. That's not good. The same is true here. So it's about querying that data, asking it questions, or making assertions, and ultimately collaborating and sharing with that. And this second point, by the way, the learning stage, is also where the whole human versus AI question really, really comes down to. Does anybody know who this guy is? You yell the name? Garry Kasparov, that's right. Garry Kasparov, for those of you who don't know, was a world chess master, grand master actually for almost 20 years. This picture was taken in 1997, and Garry was playing against a computer and an AI called Deep Blue. And Garry lost. Garry essentially lost to an AI that is simpler than the average chess application that I can download on my phone today. So put yourself into his shoes here for a second, right? You built your life on it. You invested so much time, you became the best in the world, and suddenly, one day, you essentially get beat by a glorified calculator. What do you do? What do you do now? Well, Garry didn't give up. He actually turned it around. He put more time into it. He started to investigate this AI phenomenon. And he started to look at the strengths and weaknesses that we find in it. And one of the things that he ran into was Moravec's paradox, which says that it's comparatively easy to make computers exhibit adult-level performance on things like intelligence tests or games, but it is difficult, yea, almost impossible to give them the skills of a one-year-old when it comes to perception and mobility. AI can't do everything, right? So it is difficult to give computers intuition or to give them creativity. And based on that, and the idea of strategic planning, he started to develop this little test of his, where he pitted weak players, like myself, and average machines, but with a superior process, against stronger players, or stronger players with strong machines, but an inferior process. And the weaker players would beat them over and over and over again. So there's something there in the way that we think, in our intuition, our creativity, in our way of providing direction. Humans aren't perfect. We know this. Anybody who has ever traveled with me knows that. How often have I forgotten my passport somewhere in a hotel lounge? Or remember that? Yeah. So we're not perfect. As the amount of data increases, we're getting a lot of data in, as the complexity of the systems increase as well, there's new tools to help us reason through that. And these tools are great at doing that job, great at doing this heavy lifting. But we are still here to provide guidance. We are the ones that are in the midst of strategic planning. And that's one of our strengths that won't go away. And this gets us to the third step. The third step in this larger evolution is automation. And when I talk to you all, obviously this is not a new topic. We've been talking about automation for almost a decade now. Automation and actuation together. So we've had the evolution of tools like Chef and Puppet, Ansible and InSpec, Docker, and so on. All of these are powerful actuation engines that helped us to automate these tasks, that helped us to put the decisions which we made earlier into practice and do so consistently. So automation as a whole, it needs the right decisions. And these decisions are where AI comes in, so it can help you support that. But decoded enterprise, decoded everything, really is the foundation for us to programmatically alter these systems. And it is critical for the execution of the promise of AI. So if we look at what's happened over the last couple of years, what do we have today? Like, what's real, for a second? And when I look at my job at the moment, there's a couple of areas where I can see AI being effective and being real and being there. Let me introduce those three main areas to you. Number one, cost. We all care about cost. We're trying to drive it down. Okay, sometimes when I spin up machines, I don't care about cost as long as the bill is handled by somebody. But these organizations care about cost, ultimately. AI can help you with that. So it can help find over-provisioned resources, adapt to the traffic that you get. It can help you find stranded resources that people like me left there and went home and never shut down properly. And yeah, it can ultimately improve your cost this way. Actually, Kubernetes and before that, Borg was founded on the idea of using the hardware more effectively. That was the whole idea behind it. Make sure that the workloads are distributed in a way that they use that hardware in the best way possible. So cost is the first sector. Second sector is security. AI can help us in security. So for instance, what we've done recently is we looked at unused permissions that people have in the cloud. If you look at the total list of permissions, there's like 600 plus, depending on which cloud you look at. That's a lot to handle for us manually, right? It's really hard to know where I should focus on. And this is, again, a field where AI comes in and can help us optimize these roles and give us better recommendations about what to do. Also, if you've been in the security space for a bit, I remember 2 years ago when I was at Black Hat, I think almost every security vendor in one way or another talked about anomaly detection. So you'll see a lot of that too. Where's the behavior that's weird, that's anomalous in my environment? Where are the things that should not happen there? And this is where AI helps too today. So ultimately, it helps us increase the security and also helps us increase the velocity that we have. Because we don't want security to be a blocker, we actually want security to be a driver of velocity too. So these things go hand in hand. And then the third area, and I like this one personally a lot, is about manageability. And yes, there's fields in operations where AI comes in, like it can give you good recommendations about how to operate your environments more effectively. But really, the area I like the most is troubleshooting. It is those cases where you typically rack your head around because you don't know where that error is. And the more complex these environments are, the more layers they have, the harder it is to find. And this is, again, a field where we can both help you find the right area that caused this, as well as help you anticipate failures and prevent them. So, okay, all of these have one thing in common. All of them are assistive. They are here to help us as humans, to help us do a better job, right? This is not an AI replacing any of the jobs that you have had, unless, of course, like you like crunching through millions of rows in a table and trying to find the right data. And it is a bit of a hobby, but if I have to do it repeatedly, it's also really, really tough to do. There's more interesting topics that are connected to all of this. So for instance, we've got AI learning from the human behavior and predicting what kind of steps you want to take, predicting the right way to help you. We've got a big issue around trust, which is a very complex topic. How do you know you can trust the recommendations and the AI that you have, which we are still trying to resolve? And it kind of leads into the next one, which is bugs in AI. Like we've all heard about these cases where it spiraled out of control, for instance, at Wall Street, where you had negative feedback loops, and that caused millions in damages, I think like $10 million per minute in the case in 2012. So there is enough areas here to really work on, and where sometimes it does look like it's an incomplete machine, but it is getting there. So if you want to, feel free to find me in the hallway. I always like talking about these topics, and this may be a future talk as well. So in closing, the cognitive scientist Steven Pinker, he wrote, "The main lesson in 35 years of AI research is that the hard problems are easy, and the easy problems are hard." Don't focus on the hard problems. Use these tools to solve these more easily for you, right? Just like Muddy Waters used an amplifier for the hard work of making his guitar louder, he didn't just strum louder, you can let AI do the hard work of crunching through your data and providing you with input. for the leaders in this room, AI isn't another technology to help you replace employees. It isn't. It's there to make them awesome and amazing at their job. It's another tool to help them be better. So if you think about it, it's just like Muddy Waters was the foundation for Led Zeppelin. AI is really built on the foundation of the coming world and the new technologies that you've built. Gary Kasparov really put it best when he said, AI will force us to be more human. So keep collaborating because you are rock stars. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominik.
Siva.
Good to see you. Our next speaker has a lot of experience with one of the largest open source communities in the world. Here to share his lessons learned, one of the creators of Kubernetes and a distinguished engineer at Microsoft, please put your hands together for Brendan Burns.
Thank you. Have a good day. Hey there. How's everybody doing? Good? All right, cool. So I want to talk today about my experience with open source and a little bit of history, some lessons learned. This is my first time through this deck, so it could be over in 5 minutes. It could be over in 45. We'll see. All right. I wanted to give you a little bit of a perspective on my personal history here. The very first open source project that I got involved with as a participant as opposed to a user was this project called JMeter, which is a load tester. And I started with that a long time ago in 1999 when I actually had some load that I needed to put on a website. I moved on from that. I went into graduate school and I was doing a PhD, and I happened to be playing a bunch of Quake 2. And I wanted to use my joystick, and so I sort of started to contribute to the Quake 2 project for Linux after it had open sourced it, and ended up being a maintainer there. And if there's a story here, it's kind of like I accidentally my way into being maintainers on a couple of projects. I did a PhD in robotics, which I used a ton of open source from this project called OpenCV, which many of you've used, that Intel released for image processing. The Open Dynamics engine, which is just a fantastic physics simulator, because it turns out that when you're driving around $500,000 robots, it's better to crash them in simulation than in reality. So we did a lot of work in simulation, found a lot of bugs in simulation before we moved on. I worked on this project called DroidDraw, which was sort of one of my first things that I created from scratch. It was a WYSIWYG GUI editor for Android. So when Android came out, it didn't have a WYSIWYG GUI editor, and you had to write XML, and that was not good. And so created this tool to help me build some Android apps. I then went into the software industry, where not everything is open, and worked on some closed source software for about 4+ years. Used a lot of open source technology there, but wasn't really contributing. And it was really interesting because I sort of put my head down into a closed source world in a pre-cloud era. And then in 2012, after some big corporate reorgs, I popped my head back up into cloud. And a whole bunch of stuff that had happened in open source during that time period that I really just hadn't been paying any attention to. And it was a really fascinating moment because I entered into sort of the dark ages, I would say, in the open source as library, open source as tool era, where people built libraries that were useful or built tools that were useful. And I popped my head up into the open source as distributed application and configuration manager and system software orchestration kind of technology era. And just orienting myself to that new world after having been away from it for a long time was really both exciting and really interesting to see how the world sort of evolved. And when we started looking into cloud, I was looking at a lot of the technologies around Chef and Cloud Init and a bunch of the other sort of how do you take applications and deploy them out to the cloud. And that led to, in the conjunction with Docker mainstreaming containers, that led to the development of this project that became Kubernetes. And actually was sort of the light bulb went off, a few blocks over there after the first Docker meetup in Seattle in the late fall of 2012. And sort of ever since then, that's been that. And that's been interesting because it's turned into this amazing learning opportunity about how do you build communities and how do you scale. And just like every year, there was a great quote that said something like, every order of magnitude, the problem changes. And it's just so true, and we'll talk through that a little bit. So that's sort of my history that leads me up here, and I hope this is interesting. I wanted to talk about why we build open source software, and starting with JMeter is a great example because JMeter is a useful tool. I don't think anybody's ever going to build a business on the back of a load testing tool. I don't think that anybody's ever going to be like at a party and be like, yeah, I created a load testing tool. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I don't want to prejudge, but it's never worked for me. But it's the sort of thing where it's like, if we all built it separately, they would all be really bad bash scripts, right? And we probably all have, actually. But if we build as a community, we get to share our effort. And actually, I went and grabbed some screenshots to put these slides together. I drew those icons in, I don't even remember what the pixel editor was on Linux in 2002, but I drew those icons, and you'll note actually I was kind of a Java person at the time, and they kind of have the Java purple in them, because that was where my head was at, and so I drew those icons, and they're still in the project, right? And that's crazy, and so when we all bring our different sets of skills, and we collaborate better as a result. And I think that's an amazing class of open source software where we say, you know what, we need this tool. It's really useful. If we do it all by ourselves, we'll build lousy tools. We can all work together. No one's really gaining any advantage over anyone else, but it's just more useful. And I think that's really great. And that's an important component of why we go ahead and have these communities come together. It's a very sort of utilitarian approach. I think one of the things that's interesting about when I moved on to working on DroidDraw was this idea that you can actually tell someone that something new can exist and can make their lives better. So I think everybody kind of knew that you need a load testing tool. It's obvious that if you're going to run a website, you should probably load test it. I think that for a lot of people who are sort of struggling through how the heck do I figure out how to use these weird XML objects to create a GUI, there were designers before, so clearly it's not like it was oh my gosh, you could do it in a GUI. But I think that one of the things that was interesting here is that I just started kicking the software out because I was annoyed, and this group of people suddenly formed up around me. I wasn't even anticipating it, right? It was just all of it. I had this itch, and I did something, and I put it up on a mailing list somewhere. And all of a sudden, there are all these people who are eagerly awaiting the next release, and could you do this, and could you do that? And that ability to kind of empower a large group of people who may never actually contribute, but who are having a better time because they're using the software that you build, and then eventually some people contribute as well, becomes another really prime motivator for open source, right? It's really, at least for me, one of the defining characteristics of all of the software that I've loved to build has been that it has empowered other people, right? And I think that we go and we want to try and make people's lives easier, and we do these in different places, right? So I use a ton of, open source browsers and music players and other stuff like that. I've never contributed to any of those. They've made my life better. I come and build tools like this, and hopefully I've made other people's lives better. And so it's not necessarily that we all work on the same thing like we did with JMeter, but actually that we each build our own tools that are the things that we're interested in or just happen to be the gap that we saw, and we uplift the complete set of software that's available to us. And so I think it's another really interesting idea, and also sort of how the first moments when that community comes together, when everyone says, oh man, that's a great idea. I think the most interesting thing for me that when I looked back and I sort of popped my head up in 2012 was that I think cloud fundamentally changed all of this. And I think that the reason that cloud, and I have a very broad definition of cloud, which generally means writing applications across multiple servers in not a client server kind of way. It can be in your data center, I don't care. But the notion that we need to build and deploy at scale in a reliable way to services that are up 24/7 is sort of what I think of when I say cloud. And it really changed the world, I think, in two ways. One is because there's really right now, and I think this is a problem, but really right now, there's not a great way to package and deploy distributed systems. I mean, there's bits and pieces here and there, but like not in the same way that I could put a CD into a drive and double click and then it just sort of ran for the next 5 years. And that means that in some ways the software industry has a challenge, right? Because you can either build clouds or you can consume clouds, and the software industry in the middle is figuring things out, and I think that's why the discussion about open source and open source business model in Nell's first talk is so relevant and interesting. Because we're still figuring out, like, how do we create a software industry in the middle? But it also meant that, oh my gosh, there's all of this complexity, and we need to wrangle our way around this complexity, and so we're going to have to build tools together, and we're going to have to share stuff, because like, if you tried to build it from scratch, you just would never even get started, right? And so I think that was the interesting thing about cloud as well, is you start seeing all of these tools exploding in the open source, because the business model is tricky, and there's just a ton of complexity that you need to solve. And it really, I think, fundamentally changed the way that people thought about open source. And then also there was this, Red Hat had sort of proven out that you could actually build open source business models. And so there was also an interest around, well, hey, there's this cloud thing, there's a lot of interest in open source. There's probably there's business models in here somewhere. And so there was a lot of sort of like venture capital interest in open source as well. And so that was sort of a fundamental foundational change in what happened. But I wanted to shift from sort of why we build open source to think about building open source communities. And I think when I've talked to a lot of people about this subject. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, hey, like, we want to do a thing that looks like that thing that you did. And the very first thing I say to them is, why? Right? Like, why do you want to do this? Like, you shouldn't want to do this just because it's cool. You should have a really grounded reason. You work for a company, you're interested in stuff. There's a reason why you want to open source. And I think this is a fundamental misconception for a lot of people, is like they think of open source as a category, right? And it's not. There's a bunch of different categories of open source. Open source, literally means, hey, the source is out there under an open license, but the idea behind an open source project is motivated by something. You wouldn't just open source just for the sake of open sourcing. You open source with a reason in mind. And so I think the important question, when I don't just say why and walk out, I say, what kind of community are you looking to build, right? If you're building an open source and you're trying to create open source, it's because you're trying to create a community. So what kind of community are you trying to build? I think that the first kind of community maybe not the first, but one of the important categories of community is this notion of open for partners, right? And there is a class of open source that is open source largely because you want to partner with 3 or 4 other people, and you don't necessarily trust each other, and you need some place where you can place this thing that you're going to collaborate on, so that if someone decides to not be nice, you're still protected. So you're opening it not because you want a broad community, not because you really necessarily are that into open source, but it's just the practical way to provide a forum for collaboration amongst a small set of people. And I think Android is a perfect example of this, right? Like, there's a small set of handset manufacturers out in the world. That's why that project is open source. There's really almost no other reason why that project is open source, in my mind anyway. I think the next step up from that is where you look at something like single vendor open source. Someone once joked to me, actually, that single vendor open source was the new closed source. And it's sort of true at some level, except for I think that when you look at single vendor open source, it's because actually it's just more pragmatic and more useful and more interesting for the world if the project is out in the open, and there's just no reason not to. Right? So if you look at the open sourcing of .NET, I'm sure, and in fact I know that there have been people from the community who have contributed to .NET, but I'm not sure that that was the motivation, right? I think that it was really put out into the open because it was the right thing to do, and they thought that they could execute faster and in a more open way with the community of users, but it wasn't because they necessarily wanted contributions. And I think there's a lot of open source projects that fit into this model. Chrome is another one that fits into this model, where it's open, but it's not really trying to build a community of developers working on it. And there's a lot of value in that too. right? I mean, I think both .NET and Chrome have been very successful being single-vendor open source projects. Chrome is now a multi-vendor open source project, I guess. And then I think another version of an open source community is sort of open for collaboration. I think if you look at the Linux kernel, it's a good example of that. Like, a bunch of people around the world want to collaborate. Open source is the right way to do that. They belong to different companies and everything else like that. They need to come together and collaborate. But they're not really necessarily looking to build a large community, right? There's a large community of people who use Linux. I don't think that I'm trying not to speak for people, but my sense is that within the kernel community, increasing the number of GitHub stars or increasing the number of people, it's just not a focus, right? But they need to be able to collaborate, and open source is the way that they collaborate. And then I think, finally, when you look at something like Kubernetes, we really set out to build a community. Right? We knew that we had to have an ecosystem. We knew that ultimately we needed users to support each other and be successful and do all of the great stuff that Nell was talking about in the very beginning. We had to go out and build that community. And that can also be a reason for open source. It's not just about collaboration around the source. It's actually about an open community of people working together in all sorts of venues. We have docs people. We have contributor experience people. We have people who are ensuring that the code of conduct on our Slack channel is okay. There's a lot of different people out in this open community that make up what we think of as the project. And I think that it's inescapable that this thing wouldn't have been successful if we hadn't gone and done that. And I think it was a real differentiator. It's interesting because Microsoft actually participates in all of these, right? And I think a lot of companies do, right? There's places where we're open for partners. We open source the Linux agent that we run on your Azure VMs because we want our customers to see the code so they trust that we're not, doing stuff inside their VMs that they don't know about, right? We do some single vendor open source with .NET, TypeScript, things like that. We collaborate on the Linux kernel. We have a Linux kernel team, and we collaborate to make sure that it runs great on Azure. And contribute Linux code. And then we're very active in a bunch of these open source communities, and in fact, in some ways, in building more community around projects like Chromium. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff like this that we do, and obviously GitHub was pretty exciting as well. I wanted to spend the rest of the time here that I have available to me talking about how we actually go about building communities and learning some of the stuff that I learned over the course of developing Kubernetes. And this is sort of the order of magnitude thing, right? In the first 10, I feel like it's not really about the open source community at all. It's really about every other software project you've ever done. Get the unit testing right. Get the integration testing right. Get the frameworks right so that people can develop software together. Developing software by yourself is usually very easy. Developing software in a small group, you start having to have more automation. You need documentation. You're going to have people come and go. The first 10 is really about that. Getting that infrastructure right, getting the patterns and the rhythm of the place. And it's essential because, of course, small changes in trajectory early on have dramatic impact out into the future, right? So if you get it wrong and you're testing, and we actually had some of these problems where we didn't have enough testing, and actually a historical sin that is still present in Kubernetes effectively is we've got some really good unit testing, and we've got some really good full-on run-a-cluster integration testing. And the space in the middle where you do sort of lightweight integration testing was never really focused on, and as a result, it's really, there's not enough there, and it's a problem, right? And if we'd done a better job in the first minutes of the project getting that little space right, we would be in a better place in some ways infrastructurally. And so it's really important to get all the pieces into the right place. When you move on to the next 100, the interesting thing is it's okay, now we're too big, right? We can't have that little tight-knit coordination thing going on. We need to break up. We need to be in smaller teams. We need to be having leads. We need to be automating things so that a contribution that I make over here, I'm doing pre-merge validation so that it doesn't break some other component that I don't really understand. You need to do all of the sorts of things that happen as you go from being able to all hold it in your head to being able to only really hold little bits and pieces of it in your head at any particular time. And then you start to work on planning. Because now suddenly cross-cutting features, you have to synchronize this person's work and this person's work. All right, then as you go beyond, and this is something that a lot of projects haven't hit, and we had to just sort of explore, it's the problems just multiply, right? And you start worrying about delegating responsibility, sub-teams around release and security, and how do you manage these sort of verticalized bits of your project? How do you do meetups and conferences, and where are the bottlenecks into people orienting your project? And it becomes this like, the management of the project itself becomes a task unto itself, right? And then the other thing is, of course, like every person you add to the project increases the probability that you're going to unfortunately run into a bad actor. And so at 1,000, I mean, probably by the time you're at 100, you have one. By the time you have 1,000, you have 3 or 4. And so you need to start thinking about, maybe more, unfortunately, you need to start thinking about how do you figure that out? How do you identify and police people who are in your community and who are not contributing to your community in a positive way? And then also, how do you set a coherent direction? Because suddenly there's going to be a bunch of leads and all sorts of people, and like, how do we all know where we're going, right? That is a really interesting thing. I think that going through that process, you learn a lot about how to manage a project, and you realize that at some point, like, I know we're all a bunch of developers, and like, but sooner or later you're going to need product managers. You're going to need project managers. And like, the more I spend time in these communities, the more I realize getting that voice of the community back is an incredibly important part of the job. Organizing the work, making sure everybody feels happy is an incredibly important part of the job. And you need to do that, distributing the work and managing all of the execution. I think the next piece of this is you have to think about how are you going to manage needs and expectations. Right? I think one of the interesting things you see in these projects is to become more and more mission critical, and this was alluded to a little bit, is that suddenly like you're mission critical to some company, but like they're not paying you, and so how do you balance that, right? How do you balance the fact that you know what, you signed up for this, right? You didn't sign up to be a developer sitting in your by yourself working on something by yourself. You signed up because you wanted your project to be useful and used by the world. And part of being useful and used by the world means fixing people's bugs, right? But at the same time, you're on vacation with your family for the first time in a year, and somebody needs a bug fixed. It's not the right time, right? So you have to figure out how do you balance those trade-offs. It's a really important part. And I think there's not enough focus on this. On both sides, right? I think there's a lot of open source people who say, woe is me. People keep asking for me to fix stuff. And I kind of want to say, you know what? You signed up for it. But on the same time, there's a bunch of people who I've seen be incredibly bad actors about demanding and how can you possibly, and et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, dude, it's free, right? Like, there's this, and it's a collaboration. So, and I think that's tricky, right? And it's really tricky to get right. The piece of this that I want to think about even more is how do you govern a project. This was an amazing learning experience for me, and I think for everybody on the leadership team in the Kubernetes community. And I think that this was something where we really had to figure it out on the fly. And I think one of the things we did when we realized we needed governance, we had this sort of moment when we were like, oh, wow, we need governance, was that there was just tribal knowledge all over the place. And no one knew, like we did these surveys where people would be like, I'm incredibly excited about your project. I have no idea where it's going or how to contribute. And you're like, that is a bad problem, right? And so I think that we really realized that we had to be more explicit. We had to put in the right structures so that people just knew how to help, right? But there were a bunch of non-goals too, right? Like I didn't think we're not interested in directing the project. We're not interested in giving people power. We're really just interested in clarifying how this thing is run so that everybody's on the same page. And I want to say that if you ever create an open source project, this is what your initial governance is going to look like, right? And I've even learned this, right? I've lived this thing, and I'm pretty sure that this is still what the next project that I do's governance is going to look like, right? You get the governance that evolves over time because in the 10-person stage, governance is pointless. It just slows you down. So you'll evolve to a point where there are rules and there are ideas and there is structure about how things will be done. It's just none of it will be written down anywhere, right? And that's bad. Because at a point, the new people can't figure it out. Initially, the tribe just sort of educates the people who join the tribe, but eventually, you have to codify things. And the important decision here is, like, how are you going to do it? And there's a bunch of different models for open source about how you do this. There's, like, the BDFL model, which, personally, I hate. There's the hierarchical model, which I don't really like and is sort of against the sort of tenets of open source, I think, in general. Although I think you can point at examples of this, right? Linux is very hierarchical. Python was very BDFL. And then there's the last one, which is the sort of collaborative communal design, which is what I prefer, but my goodness, is it a mess, right? Like, it's hard to explain to somebody, right? And so in that vacuum, you have to step in and really create governance. And you need to do it before the thing gets sick. And I think we got really lucky that we stepped in and started to work on governance, and the project was still operating pretty healthily. Because if you don't, you're going to be in a situation where it's an emergency. And we got really lucky. I mean, really, like the first real emergency came like 2 to 3 months after we started to form governance, where we had some of the initial structures in place. And it was just such a wake-up call. And so I think it's incredibly important as we think about how we grow these communities to be thinking about what are our checkups? How do we know what's going on? Do we have the right things in the right places? And one of the most important piece of this, I think, that has come out in the last 3 or 4 years is this notion of a code of conduct. Like every single project, it should be right next to your license file. Like, you want to start a project, you're going to need 3 things. You're going to need a README, you're going to need a license file, and you're going to need a code of conduct. And you should not start a project without those things. Because that's the framework, that's the grounding, that's the things that set the right stage. This is sort of my summary of every code of conduct, because I'm from the 80s and Bill and Ted's. But for me, it was really shocking, because I was like, this is just no-brainer stuff. We're professionals, be nice. But it turns out 1,000 people, roll the dice, there are people who don't get that. And so you have to write these things down so that you can say, yeah, this is where we said, and by being part of this, you agreed to this, and if not, here's the door, right? And that's incredibly important, and I would like us to start moving on that. I think the other thing is we need to make sure that we focus on healthy dialogues. I'm going to run through. I'm running out of time, so apologies. We focus on building healthy dialogues. We're going to have disagreements. We have to do it in a real way, in an honest way, in a way that we move the project forward, but that also we're respectful. I think one of the most amazing things that we did in Kubernetes was build a really welcoming community. That meant a lot to me, and I think it's still one of the most important contributions that we've made to open source. This is something I think we've had a harder time with. I think we had a lot of pretty burned out people at different times. It's tricky. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was the fact that forks, I think, and not, I tried to get a Twilight reference in here. Does any, no, maybe, sort of, yeah. It didn't work. Like, I couldn't figure how to get it in, but not that kind of forks. I think we have to think about forks as the ultimate escape hatch. A fork is the way that a project tells you that it's unhealthy. It's actually a good thing. When we thought about governance, one of the things we always said is, hey, you know what? The greatest thing about establishing all of this governance is if we really screw it up, someone will fork. And at the end of the day, I think that's one of the other most amazing pieces of open source is that if the technology and the project that you're building is useful, you can even screw up the governance and the project will continue to survive. It's hard, but it will continue to survive. And it's an important check and balance that the community has to basically, sort of kick the people who are in charge out. And I think that's a really important piece of how we move forward together. All right, so hopefully that gives you a perspective of my history in open source, an idea about what open source is like, how we build these giant communities. I'll be around. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
I need the clicker. That's all right. Thank you, Brendan. Hey, come on back out.
Sorry.
Thank you, Brendan. Awesome. Have a good day. All right. Our next speaker is from AWS. He is the general manager of AWS Web Services, responsible for AWS's cloud management tools, and is the awesome AWS lead heading up OpsWorks, the partnership between Chef and AWS, the partnership between our two great companies. Please join me in welcoming Siva to the stage.
Thank you, Nell.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm honored to be with you all today. I love the theme of the conference. This is very near and dear to me. I have been personally working with Chef for over 7 years now. We share a lot of principles and values together. As I go through this thing, I think a lot of things that I'm going to talk to you is going to resonate with you well. So in my job, I talk to a lot of customers, many of them, almost in every sector and with all levels, from technical folks to all the way to C-level folks. So one of the questions that we hear commonly is, it's not about the tools and specific things. The customers ask me, how can we be like you? At AWS, we are very passionate about innovating on behalf of the customers, and the pace of innovation is important, timing is important, DevOps. So I thought of using this as an opportunity and very relevant in the current context to dive deep there. About me. So general manager at AWS, responsible for a set of services that are listed here. When I am not working, you can find me coding in PowerShell. Why PowerShell? I used to be at Microsoft as director there, and one of the tools that my team built is PowerShell. Before joining Amazon, the last version of PowerShell is PowerShell desired state configuration. Launched it with that. Then, love hiking. 2 recent pictures from last week. So the first one is a close bear encounter last Friday. I was in Shenandoah. That was fun. And the bottom picture is from Alpine Lakes, Annette Lake. It's about 45 minutes here. Very serene, blissful. I can just sit there and stare at it for hours together. Maybe we should create an open source community in the Alpine Lakes. So let's start with the problem. The need for governance is ever increasing. Security requirements, compliance regimes requirements, and the governance is increasing. For companies to stay competitive, there is pressure to innovate, pressure to be agile, pressure to deliver more and faster, right? This means for an IT is being pushed in multiple directions. That's the challenge, right? Like there is a trade-off between agility and the trade-off between ever-increasing governance and meeting the security things. So these are often at odds. If you push on one dimension, we may have to compromise on the other one. We had the same challenge at Amazon since it started like a couple decades ago. But we took this thing of how do we do both? How can we achieve both? And it turns out that we can do this thing. So that's going to be the theme of the discussion today. And you has heard from Barry yesterday with a slightly different terminology as velocity. So we are all trying to achieve the same thing. So the goal for me today is to more talk about the principles of what enables us to be successful, and share them with you, removing that it's not based on a specific process, it's not based on a specific tool or so. Hopefully, you can take these learnings with you and apply wherever you are. So these are automate everything, architect for change, right culture, innovate and collaborate, and open source. So these are based on Amazon's own experience, feedback and collaborations with customers, and based on my experience in observing them. Starting with automate everything. Heard from Barry yesterday. This is also in his first list. So I wanted to take a slightly different pivot on this thing, which is, why do we automate? What drives it, right? In the past, when we had a waterfall-based model, it's like the deployments happen once in a quarter or once in 6 months or a yearly basis. The need for automation is not that high. Whereas with agility, we need to push changes faster and faster and faster. And if we want to deploy changes daily and frequently, means that the system needs to be repeatable, especially as you are migrating to the cloud. Cloud enables a whole bunch of new use cases, and it enables you to do things in a much, much more dynamic way, more agile way. Means that repeatability at scale becomes an important thing. And the way that you achieve repeatability is by automation, okay? So, which we all know. So the things that I want to highlight, a few of them, is how do you automate, or the principles or the concepts of automating this thing. So that the automation that you do is much more repeatable. Small changes and continuous deployment is a key aspect of that. So when you make the changes small and deploy it continuously, if something fails, it's very easy to pinpoint what failed, and hence it can be rolled back or fixed, whatever, in a short period of time. The next one is the desired state or idempotent style of programming, okay? This is something that was insightful to me. I personally have struggled to understand the difference between these two things many, many years ago. One of the things that my team built was an agent software. And over the periods, the agent needs to be robust and robust thing. So over the years, what turned out to be is the more code was written in agent that had to deal with all the corner cases and recovering from error cases and all that stuff. The main logic became smaller and smaller, okay? So on the other hand, when you adopt like a desired state kind of a model, or even use imperative but idempotent way of coding this thing, what that enables is you write a program that does a set of things. And it checks first, is the system in this state? If so, do nothing. If not, fixes it. And along the way, if it hits any glitches or glitches and it fails, then all you need to do is rerun it. All of a sudden, the program becomes simpler. The number of corner cases and error conditions that needs to be handled goes way down. Of course, like everything as code has been thematically, you've been hearing this thing again and again, so I'm not going to touch upon that. Pessimistic view. So for the most part, you find me a strong advocate of being very optimistic, can-do attitude, kind of a thing. But in this one particular case, when there is tests involved in the along the deployment, pessimistic view helps. So you want to validate the corner cases in a way that if something is not happy, it gets kicked out. For example, when my team writes code for my services, a developer checked in code, it goes all the way through the pipeline. We have a very sophisticated pipeline that just keeps going in a continuous way. And the way that we feel confident that it just works is because our testing is so good that if something is not right, it gets kicked out. So as you are automating things, you step up at a system level. How do you put things together? What's the architecture? And the key component of that is we all know things evolve over time. What you see today is not going to be exactly the same as today 2 or 3 years from now. New things come up. How do you put things in place, an architecture in place that is able to adopt it in a way so that you are in the leading front and cutting edge always? So think about building blocks. Think microservices and building blocks so that you compose them together in a way that if you're not happy or if you get something new, you should be able to relatively easy to pick and replace them. The other component is choice. At least this is true from an AWS perspective, right? Since we have customers from diverse segments and with all different styles or passion or religious things or whatever you call it, right? So we are very focused on providing the customer choice. That way, you could pick the best tool to solve any particular problem. And likewise, for many of you guys who are in the process of providing services to your users, whether it's internal or external users, choice might be an interesting one to think about. So after automation, the next one is humans. People play an important role in achieving agility. Okay? So this means that how do you break the silos? How do you break this thing? So the way you do this thing is you start with a common shared goal. Right? It's not a discipline-specific goal. It's more of a company thing. It's more of a cross-discipline goal that we all get together with a common outcome. Whether it could be a customer problem or it could be a business outcome-related one. Everybody rallies into a single one in solving this one. Sometimes I get into this discussion that, especially at an operator level, as we are automating, there's a concern that, my job might be going away. In fact, what I noticed in my own experience observing a lot of these folks is it's the opposite. You will be more relevant. You will be more relevant solving the problem. So I had this culture shock when I joined Amazon 5 years ago. The security team, as an example, security team in AWS, very strong team, extremely deep security folks. Okay? They are involved in every release that we do here. But there's a huge difference of how the security team works with the development organization. They're not considered as a blocker. They all share this thing. We have to ship with high quality. So when an issue is found, the engineers and the security folks come together. How do we ship on time and without compromising the security thing? So we need both. So once you have the right culture, the innovation naturally follows. Collaboration naturally follows. Right? So start with the right culture that leads to innovation, and innovation is a key for long-term success. Collaboration helps both internally, within the team, in the company inside, and more importantly, externally. And in a lot of cases, collaboration with ideas gives 1 + 1 = 3. And open source is such a powerful and wonderful medium for fostering these kind of collaborative ideas. And these days, tools like GitHub and Slack and all these things have built these features so nicely that this further fosters this environment. So motivation for AWS. Why do we do open source? Why are we deeply invested in this thing? Okay? It all starts from customer obsession. The work that we do is 90% of the features that we build starts from customers and solving a customer problem. Technology does not drive us, but the customer problem is. Right? We use technology to solve a customer problem, but not the other way. So to put it bluntly, we do open source because our customers are asking for it. That's a big part of it. So in addition to innovation and collaboration that I just talked about it, teams at AWS also has realized by partnering with communities helps reduce the maintenance costs as well. And lastly, and more importantly, is open sourcing helps increase the quality and the security. More eyes looks into the code, better things. So as a result, you can see us contributing to Linux, Kubernetes that you heard about it before, and sometimes when there are no things, when we have innovated early, then we share that with the open source, like Firecracker, which I'll be touching upon a bit later. Or we contribute to the open source to our customers, like Netflix, Spinnaker. So we are proud to be part of many, many open source projects, actively participating in them, and many of our services leveraging them in various shape or form. Our customers are using them. So you can see us to be more actively participating as we go forward as well. And we are part of many communities. For example, we are the member of Linux Foundation, Platinum at CNCF, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and we are Tier 1 at OSCon. Again, like everything we do, since open source is such a foundational for us, you will see us more and more in this thing. So now let's get into a few examples of open source, just to get flavor. ML. As you know, there are many, many frameworks in ML. So TensorFlow is an example of that. So customers asked for TensorFlow on AWS. So we want to make AWS the best place to run TensorFlow. So when we took this stock thing and ran the TensorFlow on 256 GPUs, we got about 65% scaling. So then we put engineering and R&D on it, and we were able to push it to near linear scale. We are able to achieve like over 90% scaling. That's an example of that thing, right? Like, so regardless of what the innovation is, as things evolve, we want to make sure that we are contributing to it in a way and make AWS the best place to run it. And in some places, we innovate where there is a need and an equivalent thing is not available. Containers are beautiful. Okay? It provides fast startup. It provides nice way of packaging. Okay? But containers themselves is not a security boundary. What I mean by that is we can't run, or we should not run, 2 containers from 2 different tenants inside the same virtual machine, since container is not considered as a security boundary. AWS runs Lambda and Fargate at an immense scale. So when you think about it, the number of virtual machines that is needed to run them separately in everything, so that necessitated for us to innovate here, to drive our own efficiencies. That's where we invented Firecracker, which achieves both. It's a micro VM technology where you get fast startup, and it is also a VM-like security boundary. So in this case, we did it fast, and we shared it with the community. Amazon Corito. It's a downstream distribution of OpenJDK. So customers have asked us to support OpenJDK for a longer time. So we created this downstream distribution at no cost, and are offering that security and other support-related things to our customers. This thing. Internally, our own services are already using Corito at scale. My services are using it, so it should work for you as well. It's just a drop-in replacement. So now let's look at how we partner with Chef. As I said, we share a lot of values, and we work closely together on many, many fronts. And a couple of examples I'm going to highlight today. One is AWS Systems Manager and Chef in Spec. Okay? So AWS Systems Manager is an operations cockpit. It's a cloud-native service. It supports both Windows and Linux, and it supports both AWS and non-AWS. It offers capabilities like patch management, remote execution. The key unique thing that it brings to table, in addition to being that single pane of glass, is the scale. Whether it uses like 10 instances or 100,000 instances that come and go, it just works from a scale perspective. Whereas Chef in Spec does represent compliance as code. So the marriage between these two things, now you can apply your profiles, community profiles, and leverage the systems manager to execute at scale. The next one is OpsWorks for Chef Automate. So you guys all are familiar with Chef Automate. So what OpsWorks brings is it makes the same thing that you're used to and make it more cloud-like. Okay? What I mean by cloud-like is things that you see on the screen. It's a pay-as-you-go, meaning if you are managing like 1,000 instances, for example, for a few hours and they come and go, you just pay for the 2 hours for the Chef license fee as opposed to paying it for a longer period. Pay as you go. It's a managed service. That means that we take care of the upgrades. We monitor that 24/7, backup, restore, support, etc. So these are the collection of management tools, services that we offer at AWS. These follow the principles that we discussed. It helps you to adopt them in a natural fashion. This includes the OpsWorks and Systems Manager that we touched a bit earlier. And many of these services are started from our own innovation, from what we have done internally, and we are externalize them, and some more are coming on its way. Bringing them all together, recapping, right? We can achieve governance and agility together. And the set of principles that worked for us, and hopefully that should work for you as well, is automate everything. And we discussed about a set of principles within why we need to automate, and the set of things to write automation in a simplified way. And we talked about architecting for change. That way you can keep adopting the new things as they come. Right culture is the key for agility, which also helps with innovation and collaboration. And open source is a great medium, and everything that you hear here in this conference is super exciting about the open source related stuff. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I attended my first Chef Community Summit in 2014. And I remember how I was sitting in awe of these stalwart figures in the chef community. Figures like Nathan Harvey, Chris Weber, Doug Ireton, and this next speaker. Now, I remember I was shocked when the speaker came up to me later after an open space on orchestration, and he remembered my name and told me, "You've been saying some really smart things today." This person showed me that not only was the chef community a healthy and vibrant place to be, but that there was a place for me in it too. Since moving to the chef board, our next speaker has dedicated his career to figuring out how to do open source in a sustainable way, both for businesses and communities. Please give a warm welcome to Adam Jacob.
Thank you, Nell. What's up? How's everybody doing? Everybody made it. That's cool. You could have stayed in bed or whatever, but you didn't. You're here at the ChefConf, and it's nice to see you. Yeah, like Nell said, I'm on the board now. That's cool. I was always on the board, but now that's the only thing I'm doing, which is cool. So yeah, I'm gonna give you like a little update on me, and then I'm gonna walk you through like a little existential crisis I had. So basically, I'm just gonna talk about myself for like 20 minutes, and you're just gonna fucking eat it. Yeah. Okay, let's do that. So what have I been doing? People ask. They're like, "Oh, are you got a new thing you're doing? Are you like you must be developing some lovely new technology?" And the answer is no. No, I'm not. Clicker, come on, Clicker. You got this. Maybe, Clicker? Oh, this is always going to be a jinxie kind of moment. Yeah, Clicker? Can you click me from back there, maybe? I bet they can't. Somewhere there's a dude back there, and he's like, "Oh, I'm doing what I can." I bet they need me to come back there and mess with my laptop. Yeah. So I built a Linux box. I'm going to talk to you while I do it. Here, take this. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I did when I left was I decided that I didn't want to use a Mac anymore because I wanted to only use things that I really liked. And so I bought this Chinese laptop made by Huawei. It's MateBook X Pro. And everybody makes the same joke when they talk about it. They're like, "Dude, it's got like Chinese spyware or whatever in it." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, but it's fucking cool. It looks great." And then I put Arch Linux on it. And I'm running Wayland and Sway. And I plugged it in yesterday to do this thing, and I was like, "Holy shit, it just worked." And the dude who's next to me, who's a delight, said to me, "Don't say that, man. That's not going to work." And he's right. Okay, try to click it now. You have the clicker. Oh, look at that. So what actually happened was, So let's give it up for 2 seconds to Sway and Waylon though. So when I plugged this thing in, like it just worked. Like all these displays came on and everything just worked. And I hit like Windows 4 and it like shot the window to the place. And I was pretty stoked. I basically thought I should just go home because it's not going to get better than this in conference land. And I was right. That was the best moment with that laptop. Okay, Derek, hit the music again. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chef. It's good to be back. I've been gone for a while. I've been doing things with my daughter. That was the next slide. Do you feel like there was enough build-up to the slide? Okay. Whew, things I've been doing. Well, I've been building a laptop. It's running Arch Linux and Sway. It's pretty dope. I wrote my own little thing for finding wireless networks. You should try it. It was cool. I've been also walking my daughter to school. That's been amazing. I've been playing video games. That's been pretty good, too. I'm still bad at Sekiro, though. You might, if you've been to other ChefConfs, you might remember I'm also bad at Dark Souls. So there you go. I've been playing with my cats. That's been super great. One of my cats is on Prozac because she was just a little anxious and she had like a pee-pee problem. And so I spent a lot of time cleaning up cat pee and being like, dude, here's a cat tree or like something. And then I gave the cat Prozac and then she was fine. And I was like, why didn't you just give me Prozac in the first place? Like, why was the advice like, get another cat box, and have you changed the litter? Like, just fucking give him Prozac. The one thing about Prozac, though, is that every once in a while she gets a squinty eye. So I have a squinty eye, but very chilled out cat. Yeah, they're a delight. But that's my advice. If you have a cat with a pee-pee problem, just go straight to Prozac. Skip all the other cat psychiatry things and just do that. I've been running a Dungeons & Dragons game. That's been pretty dope. This is my notebook where I built an encounter. This was a pretty cool encounter where they were sort of coming up on like a town that had been ravaged by an orc horde, and there were some people sort of left over that they found. This is when the players discovered that hobgoblins are dangerous in groups. Raise your hand if you know why hobgoblins are dangerous in groups. Those are my people right there. Those are the true chef people. These are all first-time Dungeons & Dragons people, and they were like, what's happening with hobgoblins? I've been hanging out with my friends. These are some of my friends. That's my friend Brad and Ryan and Brad's daughter Ariana, who is incredibly cute. I also was hanging out with a friend of mine, Sunil Dhaliwal. Sunil was the Series B investor in Chef. He was on our board for a long time. Now he runs a fund called Amplify. And we were sitting in a park together talking about life, because we were, both, now we're friends in actual life as opposed to just in business. And he asked me this question. He said, would you start another open source company? And I said, no. And it wasn't like a hesitant no. I didn't like take time to think it through and like feel nah. They just popped directly out of me, and it was emphatic. It was like, no, not doing it. No, never again. And as soon as it came out of my mouth that way, I was like, why would I say that? Like, no? Really, no? Like, a lot of my identity is like wrapped up in being the open source community guy, and like, I started an open source company, and I've written like blog posts on licensing and shit, and like, I'm pretty sure that I should have said yes. But I didn't. I said no. And it really did send me on this very deep, like, existential journey, because I was like, wow, that came from like a real primal like emotion spot, Like it was down deep in the cockles there was that no. And I was like, why? What was it that I did? And the more I reflected on it, the thing about building companies and about communities is that they're both really emotional work. Right? There's hard work to be done in the day-to-day, just doing the work of the actual work with your hands or your mind or whatever it is. But the human work, the emotional labor of just being with other people and managing those things is a lot. And the list of different kinds of stakeholders that you have when you are in business and when you're in a community is really big. You've got, I've got co-founders and other executives, and I have a boss. I have Barry Christ. I've got employees and investors and board members, and then I have customers, and there's evangelists, and then there's developers and contributors, and just people who use the software, but they're not really customers. And like, this is only the list that would fit on the slides. right? It's a huge list of different people. And each of those people, sort of on their own, just wants whatever it is that they want, right? Like when you break those people down and you take away their titles and you take away all the other things, like they want stuff. They want automation. They want friends. They want money. They want recognition. They want power. They want, who knows what they want. I've got my own list, right? There's a ton of weird, I want to play D&D and give my cat Prozac, right? Like I got all kinds of stuff that I want. And so essentially all of these people, in all of these different ways, are playing this utilitarian kind of game with themselves. They've just got what they want, and they're trying to maximize it. This is John Stuart Mill. He's the first of several black and white photos of philosophers. Why do you think there are black and white? Why are all philosopher photos black and white, Derek? Do you know?
Because it makes you look really smart.
Yeah, I think he looks smarter than he would otherwise. Also, they don't really smile. Later they do. Later a little, like when you get into like the 70s, they start to chill out a little because I think they were wearing bell bottoms. But look, John Stuart Mill is the person who gave us this phrase utilitarian, right? And when we think about people with their own desires, everybody has the things they want, and they've got this whole mess of them, and they tend to act to further those desires, right? Like, I want to play D&D. Therefore, I find people to play with, and I build the game, and we play D&D, right? Because I'm acting to further my own desires. Some of those are altruistic desires. Some of them are not so altruistic, right? And if all we do is think about ourselves and just do what we want, then what we are is a hedonist. Do we have any hedonists in the audience? You just do what you want? Right. Joshua Timberman raised his hand. You're not a hedonist. Known you since we were like 9. He's not a hedonist. But look, but John Stuart Mill was not a hedonist. He was a utilitarian, and he defined it this way. He said, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and they're wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness, right? And what makes him different than, a hedonist is that utilitarians care about aggregate happiness, right? They care about all of the mass happiness in the world. So John Stuart Mill didn't care about his own happiness alone, although that mattered. He cared about the whole group. Everybody in the room, he cared about whether you were, as a group, happier or less happy than you were before. And so in theory, if we can all agree on what makes us happy as a group, what our utility is, what the thing is we value most, then we can do the right thing as a group. We can look at any given decision and we can be like, yeah, you know what? If we did X instead of Y, how many people in this room like bacon? Keep your hand up if you like bacon more than you like bananas. Right, it's the whole group. Therefore, we should have more bacon. Utilitarianism, super easy, right? And there's one person who put their hand down and was like, I love bananas. And we're like, fuck that person, right? No bananas for them, right? You know what's weird is as a board member, I should probably swear less on stage. But the more comfortable I am, the more I swear. You've heard this before. Anyway, I'm feeling good right now. Swear words are coming out. Okay, so this sounds like a good plan, right? Everybody raised their hand. We all prefer bacon. Seems good. Turns out this is a pretty awful plan. It actually leads to some pretty bad scenarios. And one of those things is yet another philosopher. This guy was Robert Nozick. Robert Nozick, this picture was taken in the 70s. You can tell because he's smiling and looking kind of dapper. Still black and white, though. They definitely had color photography in the 70s, right? Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely they did, right? Of course. Robert Nozick was a critic of utilitarianism, and he came up with this idea to explain why this is a bad idea for running large groups of people, and he came up with this thing called the utility monster, and it goes like this. He says, utilitarian theory is embarrassed by the possibility of utility monsters who get enormously greater gains in utility from any sacrifice of others than these others lose. For, unacceptably, the theory seems to require that we all be sacrificed in the monster's maw in order to increase total utility. Raise your hand if you understood what I just said. Yeah, there's a couple of you. Okay, I'm going to break it down for you a slightly easier way. Who here likes the Cookie Monster? Yeah, who in this room likes cookies? Everybody likes cookies. I mean, really, if you didn't raise your hand, you still like cookies. Like, there's still a minute where you're like, oh, it's a good cookie, right? But the Cookie Monster loves cookies, right? You give him a cookie, he's like, and all he wants next is more cookies, and he is stoked. Right? He is the happiest monster that ever Muppeted. And so he's got all of the joy, right? And so because his happiness with the cookie is so high, If we just take all the cookies at ChefConf and we just feed them to the Cookie Monster, and he's like, then we've created more aggregate happiness through the consumption of those cookies by giving them to the Cookie Monster than we would have done if each of you had one cookie, right? Because the Cookie Monster is stoked. He loves cookies, and it makes him so happy, and what we care about is aggregate happiness, and so the number of happiness units that came into the world went up because the Cookie Monster loves cookies, right? And we kind of love to watch the Cookie Monster eat cookies because he's so stoked about it, and so every time you give him a cookie, he's like, rah, 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 and the cookie's gone, but you're like, oh, that was funny, and then you feed him another cookie, right? That's the utility monster, right? And honestly, this is kind of what running an open core business is like. You're surrounded by utility monsters. This one is the business. It's Chef. And what it cares about is revenue. It cares about money. It cares about whether or not it's a good business or a bad business. It cares about all of those things. This one's my customers. They care about their problem. They don't care about anybody else's problem. Right? They don't care about some other customer's problem. They don't care about my problems. They don't really care about my revenue so much, right? But they care about what they care about. This one are my contributors. They care about the code, right? They care about whether or not their patch gets into that thing so they don't have to have this thing that was broken still be broken. And that's what they care about. And anytime we deliver anything good to any of those people, man, their happiness goes up. They're like, good job, right? And for any individual person, you tend to think that everybody else shares your same vision of utility, right? Not always, because we're not bad people, but in general, we're like, yeah, we feel pretty aligned. Like, we're all here, we're hanging out. Even like the Open Source Initiative and the Free Software Foundation, they're utility monsters too. The Open Source Initiative cares about whether or not there's more open source software in the world. If what you do creates more open source software, man, they're gobbling it up like the Cookie Monster. They're down, they're in, 100%. If it doesn't, get out. Bad news, right? The 996 license, workers in China who were forced to work crazy hours, wrote a license that says we won't work crazy hours. Open source was like, I don't think that's open source, brah. And I'm like, really? Because I think it's bad that they work to death. But you know, it didn't fit their vision of utility, therefore it's out. Free Software Foundation, different kind of utility. They care about user freedom. Right? If what you're doing makes it so that you can use the software you want to use and the way that you want to use it on the devices you want to use it on and do what you want to do with it, it's better. If you can't, it's bad. There you go. It's black and white, right? And if you disappoint any of these humans in any way, they turn cynical and hostile. In particular, if you disappoint them by not feeding them enough cookies at the appropriate time. And if you serve too many cookies to any one of these people, well, then the whole thing is clear that you never cared about what they cared about anyway. It was always just a sham. You were just faking it, man. You didn't really believe in that community stuff. You didn't really believe, or for me, you really believe in that community stuff, but I don't think you're any good at this business thing. Right? Like, I heard every variation of every possible one of those things. And it turns out my job was to balance those things, right? My job was to just try and do the right thing. And while I'm proud of what I did, and I feel like I did a pretty good job of doing it, it was still painful enough that when my friend asked me, would you do it again? I just said no. I was like, nope, I am out. Because I'm hanging out with my kid, I'm playing video games, I got shit to do, and none of it is worrying about whether or not anyone else, their version of utility is good or bad, right? It's just not my thing anymore. And so if it sucks so much, why do it? And it turns out that I do it because I love community. I love people. I believe in them. I believe in you. I believe in human beings. And I believe that you're not actually utility monsters. That at our best, and when we come together and we find a way to care about the same things, even though we want other things too, we can find a way to have those things and still all love the thing that we love. And those communities have been just in the center of my life. I love the idea of Ubuntu. I know in my heart that the only reason I'm here is because you're here. And if you weren't here, I don't get to do the things that I'm doing. I don't get to be the person that I want to be. And if you get better and you thrive in the way you want to thrive, well, then so do I. And it doesn't matter that the thing that you care about isn't quite the thing I care about, because we do care about a lot of the same shit. And, you know, those things have been the center of my life my whole life. The first time I used FidoNet and realized I could send packet mail to Russia, I was like 9. And the Cold War was like a big deal when you're 9 and the Cold War's happening, and it's been happening like my whole little life, and I'm like, oh my God. And then I was like, those are Russians, like actual Russians who like parachute into your high school and like murder all the kids, and we have to be like Wolverines, you know? And I was like, you guys know what I'm talking about?
Red Dawn.
I'm super losing people under 40, but everybody over 40 is like, yeah, man, I remember the Cold War. I have a fun, I'm going to take a little aside. This is going to run long, but it's a funny story. I worked with this delightful, very tall Ukrainian guy, and I was not being my best self, and I was mimicking his accent. And he came up behind me while I was like doing my impersonation of him, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and he was like, if you make fun of my accent again, I'll kill you. And I was like, whoa, okay, I won't do that again. And he was like, also, you guys are dumb. And I was like, why are we dumb? And he was like, because in Russia, we knew that anyone who has Beatles not going to kill us by parachuting into high schools. And I was like, touche. Touche, my friend. I didn't know that that was going to come out on this FidoNet slide, but it's who we are now as people. Okay, moving on. Another thing that happened for me was I was in a grocery store, and I found this comic book. This is the X-Men. It's roughly issue 238. They were in Genosha, in case you're an X-Men nerd. And I picked up this series of comics from the grocery store and loved the crap out of it. I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my whole life. And it was so cool, and I loved it. And then there was a comic book store in the same little strip mall that had the grocery store where I bought these comic books. And I went into that comic book store, and I was like, have you read this thing with the Uncanny X-Men? And they were like, yeah, it's pretty great. And I was like, it is great. And then I was nerdy about these 3 issues, and they were nerdy with me. And then I bought more comic books, and then I met Joshua Timberman. And like the whole thing, like here we are, right? Community. It was so good. And my first job, I worked there, it was a delight. She kept that store open just for us. Not even a lie. I found theater. When I was in high school, I was like, oh man, you know, I'm nerdy, people pick on me or whatever. It's why I wear metal t-shirts, because there were these metal dudes who were like, don't pick on that guy or we'll kill you. And I was like, awesome. And then I was no longer, you know, at least beat up. And that was amazing. And then there was the Perl community that taught me how to program, literally taught me how to program. Like, my boss put a Perl book on my desk and was like, write a billing system. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. He was like, you will. And then I hopped on IRC, and I learned to program because there were a bunch of people in the Perl IRC channel who were like, here's how you do that, kid. And I did, and it was great. There was the chef community, where we all came together around this thing that I had built to try to fix my consulting company that my friends had sacrificed their time and money to do while they paid our bills, and we tried to work it out, and then we did. And then we had our own IRC channel, and it was called Chef. And then people came into that channel and were like, what should I cook for my first date? And instead of making fun of that person, we gave them recipes. And then they came back, and we heard how the date went, and they liked the food. I'm doing it because I care about people. Those are the moments. Those are the things that matter. And it turns out some of those things happened because they were open source communities. Perl, Chef, like, sure, that's true. But the truth is, I give a shit about open source. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Like, it's just not the thing that I need. I don't know. Like, I was happy enough using my Mac. It was fine. I didn't have some kind of existential dread when I got up in the morning about the software I was using not being open. I care about user freedom, I guess. But I'm not like mad that I can't like wrench on my Audi. It's fine. Like, I'm getting along. What I care about is community. I care about those human beings coming together to sustain each other and to take care of each other. And so if Sunil had asked me the question, would you start another community? My answer is yes. Yes, absolutely, 100% my answer is yes. But I wouldn't want to do it with those tensions that existed in the earlier couple slides. If what that means is that I'm surrounded by utility monsters who, if I disappoint any of them, they'll turn cynical and mean, I'm out. I don't want to do it. I don't care, because it's not fun. Because those people, it's hard to love those people. I do. I get it. I understand. But it's not fun. And I don't need it. Other people can love them. There's plenty of people to love in the world. They'll find people who will love them. I don't have to be that person. But I still want those people in my life, right? Because we care about the same things. And I want to be in harmony with those people. I don't want to be giving gifts. I don't want to be the person who creates this thing and then open sources it out of the goodness of my heart, out of some kind of oversized sense of just needs for free software. I want sustainable communities. I want people who come together, who take care of themselves and also take care of the software that brought them together in the first place. And I want them to do it for their own needs. I don't know what you want. I don't know what you need. I don't know if you need money. I don't know if you need friends. I don't know if you need control. Like, whatever you need in your life, I want you to find it. And I want it to transcend any of those individuals, mine included, where, like, I don't want anybody's single version of the world to become the one thing that we feed all the cookies to. I want a sustainable thing that we can trust, that welcomes everyone to participate and to find their own way for their own needs. And so that brought me back to this guy. This is John Rawls, yet another black and white photograph. Less smiley, though, than Robert Nozick. Anyway, Rawls spent a lot of time talking about how to build sustainable social institutions. That was sort of the thing he was most interested in. And he came up with this idea that is rooted in this idea of justice. And it's called justice as fairness, and it goes like this. Justice is the first virtue of social institutions, as truth is of systems of thought. A theory, however elegant and economical, must be rejected or revised if it is untrue. Likewise, laws and institutions, no matter how efficient and well-arranged, must be reformed or abolished if they are unjust. He goes on. He says, each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare of a society as a whole cannot override. For this reason, justice denies the loss of freedom for some is made right by a greater good shared by others. It does not allow that the sacrifices of a few are outweighed by the larger sum of advantages enjoyed by the many. What Rawls is saying is, if we want to have stable social institutions, if we want communities that get out of that trap of just constantly feeding cookies to each utility monster in a circle, then what we have to do is build a level of trust in the institutions that we share together, so that we can trust that the rules by which we're all getting what we want are fair and just and right? And if we do that, we don't have to sacrifice one for the other. We don't have to sacrifice what you want for what I want. We can have both have what we want. So how do we do that? Rawls came up with a game, and his game most popularly is called the Veil of Ignorance. And basically the way this works is, imagine that we're going to close the doors in this room. And once the doors are closed, we're going to lock them, and I'm going to snap my fingers like Thanos. And when I do that, the whole world will disappear. And with it will be all of your wealth, and all of your position and all of your status and all of those things. It's all gone. We're in this room. We're all there is. And what's about to happen is we're going to come up with all the rules for how the world is going to work when I snap my fingers again. So when I bring the world back in, we're the only ones who are going to decide what the rules are. So what rules would we come up with to decide? Because one of the things that'll be different is you're not guaranteed you're going to get the same position in life you have now when we come back out into the world. So maybe you're at the bottom of the ladder. Maybe you have no money. Maybe you have all the money. Maybe you have power. Maybe you don't. Who knows what you're going to wind up with, right? So what are the rules we would come up with in order to actually come up with the real rules that govern how we work? And Rawls came up with 3. He said that a reasonable group, given enough time, locked in a room, would come up with these rules to decide. The first one is they would come up with some basis of equal liberty. They would say that everyone shares the same basic equal liberties. There's some core bedrock of stuff that everyone gets no matter what, and we can never trade for any reason whatsoever. This is how we, for example, don't wind up slaves, right? Because no one would accept that when we snap the fingers, you might wind up a slave, right? Not okay. So we decide that freedom, in that way, is an inviolable piece of equal liberty. We're all going to have it, right? Maybe freedom of movement, maybe freedom of speech. It comes with all kinds of things. Another one is the fair equality of opportunity. So this says that I don't know where we start out when the finger snap happens and we all come back into life. What I know is that I should be able to go wherever I want in this new society that we create. I should have the opportunity to do whatever it is that I want to do, because I want things, you know? And I should have the ability to go achieve them. And that means that whatever the opportunity is, it needs to be available to everyone, no matter what. The last one is the difference principle. And it says that there's going to be inequality in the world once we snap our fingers again, right? Not everything will be equal. So when do we accept inequality? How do we know that an inequality is an okay thing to accept? And his answer was that we accept it only if that inequality benefits the people who have the least. Does that make sense? So like we're not allowed to build rules that say, if you have the most, you get more. It's pretty simple, right? We can only build rules that say, if you have the most, maybe you get a little less because other people need it in order to get more opportunity, in order to move into the next thing, right? And lucky for us, we're not trying, like Rawls was, to reinvent government, like society as a whole. We're just talking about our little open source community that likes automation, right? So if we're going to apply Rawls's theory, what would we do? And so the first thing we have to decide is, what will our equal liberty be, right? If we take for granted Rawls's list for the broader set, so we take freedom for granted, we take freedom of speech, we take all that stuff. I mean, we shouldn't take it for granted, but you know what I'm saying, right? What would the rules be? And this was the moment where I realized that while I don't really care about open source, I am in fact an open source and free software advocate. Because it turns out that those rules are the rules that govern free software. The first one is the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. I don't know who you are. I don't know how you came into Chef. I don't know what you want to do with it, but I know that you should be able to. It's pretty straightforward. The freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does your computing as you wish. Again, I don't know how you showed up. I don't know what position you're in. I don't know if you wrote Chef. I don't know if you just saw Chef for the first time. I don't know if this is the first moment you saw Habitat or Inspec, but whatever it is you want to do, I want you to do it, right? You got to be able to. The freedom to redistribute copies so you can help others. If you think Chef is useful, you should be able to give it to your friends so that they can be useful too. Because, hey, they deserve the same equal and basic liberty that I get, right? And then finally, we should have the freedom to distribute copies of the modified version to other people as well, right? If you change the program and now it works in a different way than it worked before and you think it's useful, you should be able to give it to those people, and I shouldn't be able to stop you because I didn't like what you changed, right? Because it's not up to me, because we're a community, because we all share the same equal and basic liberty, right? So this gets us the software. This guarantees us that if we just say that we'll never trade these things for any reason, ever, not for money, not for anything. Well, so this was a thing for Chef, because we were trading that for money, right? I was saying there's a part of this software that you're not allowed to have. Why? Well, because I want money. Therefore, eat it. But there's a part where we are free. You know, there's a part where we do have equal and basic liberty, and over here, that's where we're all happy in equal basic liberty land. Now, over here, I'm going to trade those basic liberties for money. That was once that realization hit me, I could no longer, the center for me couldn't hold. That's not why Chef changed. It just happened to be the existential crisis I was going through as I was having my conversations with my friends. But it's true. But it turns out we want more than just the software. So we have to then apply all the other rules. Fair equality of opportunity, the difference principle. We have to think about things like who becomes a member of our community? What are the requirements to be a Chef community person, right? How do we vote? Do we vote? Are we a democracy? If we're not a democracy, how do we have fair equality of opportunity? How do we ensure that anyone who wants to run the project could run the project? I don't know. You don't know either. Turns out you still don't have a vote. The way Chef works historically is I just do what I want. Did you know that? That was the deal. The deal was everybody does what they want until I don't like it. And then I say, no, I don't like it. And then you go, but we thought it was a good idea. And I go, nah. I'm not doing that anymore, but I could. I think technically I probably still could right now. How about positions of authority? Could you become the next me who gets to tell everyone that you didn't like it, therefore we're not doing it? Nope. Should you be able to? Probably. How would we know? I have no idea, but we probably have to figure it out. How about codes of conduct? You know what would be awful is if we snapped our fingers and we had all the other rules, but the thing we could do is just be mean as fuck to each other whenever we felt like it. You want to be in that community? How's that feel? Feeling good about it? I'm feeling bad about it. Because I had to have like strong metal dudes like defend me when I was a teenager so that I could grow up to wear Baroness shirts on stage. Like, I don't want that to be the deal. How about license in, license out? Again, we can't trade basic freedom. So that means that whatever we build together, we have to always build together, and there can't be any exceptions, because as soon as there's an exception, we've decided that that basic liberty isn't there anymore, and we're not equal, and it's not just, and it's not fair, and therefore what we aren't is a community. How about commercial potential? If Chef are the only people who can make money on Chef, well, what if what you want in life is money? Can you not be in the Chef community anymore? You're not allowed to do it? Are you a bad person? Are you a bad actor? Do we reject you? I mean, we could, but we shouldn't, right? Because if our goal is to actually further and sustain this resource in the world, it has to be available to you. And it turns out that by open sourcing everything, and by going through this shift, it was good for Chef's business, so it wasn't a completely altruistic endeavor, but for the first time in its history, the Chef community actually has the possibility of being a sustainable one, a real one, an actual community of people who care about this thing and they steward it together into its future. That's not given to you by me or by Barry Christ or by Corey or anyone from on high. It's yours, and it will always be yours. It'll always be the community's problem. It'll always be us to solve. And it turns out that this is incredibly messy work. We don't know what the answers to these questions are. I don't know what you want. I don't know what the things are you need to build in the world. I don't know what the right system of just elections are that allow people to rise to the highest levels of leadership in the project. Chef doesn't know, because the idea that somebody who doesn't work at Chef could rise to that level is hard. So there just aren't any easy answers. What I can tell you is that there's no more benevolent dictator to supply the compromise on your behalf, because I'm playing with my kid and feeding my cat Prozac. So you got to figure it out. It's up to you. It's not up to me. And honestly, it never should have been. It's just each of you on equal ground with everyone else, with a duty to love and sustain each other through this process, to shepherd that software that we all love into the future, to decide what it should be. And I want to thank everybody here for the gift you've given me of this community, of this time, of this software. And I look forward to building it with you, not as its dictator, but as a peer, as just another person who has things that they need from the Chef community. And I can't wait to create that future together with you. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Adam. Thank you all for coming today. You can see Adam performing tonight at the community celebration at 7 p.m. at the Paramount Theater across the street. Make sure you bring your badge for entry. Briefly, I do want to remind people, as we've heard a couple of times in these presentations, ChefConf, Chef itself has a code of conduct. We take this code of conduct very seriously. If you have questions about it, if you feel the need to report something, please talk to one of the people wearing the blue-gray Code of Conduct crew t-shirts. And finally, I want to take a moment to call out and recognize the gentleman who's been providing us with great tunes throughout ChefConf. Derek Mazzoni is our creative consultant for ChefConf and a legendary DJ on Seattle radio.
Thank you very much. Everybody, do not miss the show tonight. It's going to be amazing. It's at the Paramount. It's a legendary venue. We got Mudhoney, which never, ever does corporate shows. Deep Sea Diver, which is the future of Seattle music. And Recipe for Disaster, who are going to kill it tonight.
Awesome. Please join us tonight for a uniquely Seattle celebration. Additionally, if you tried to get into Elon Bar Evans' Zero to Pipeline Chef GitHub Jenkins session yesterday and weren't able to, you're in luck. He'll be doing an encore of his talk today. Check out the ChefConf app for the time and place. And ChefConf wraps up tomorrow with our Hack Day. We've talked about what we want to do as a community. Now let's start building it. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Chef community, and I'll see you tonight at the celebration.